Flat Earth is not only about Flat Earth. They are discussing a lot of things. Today we will have a look at a discussion between 3 flat earthers on a live stream. And they are not only discussing the shape of the earth, is space real, and so on. They are talking about what they call pseudoscience, they are talking about history, and they are talking about a lot of things. So this video is 20 minutes long. I think it's quite interesting because you get a sense of how stupid flat earth really are. They are reality deniers. Big time. So, let's start this dumpster fire.
One thing that came to mind is, I agree with you. Obviously, there's the social engineering, there's the brainwashing, the conditioning of mass media culture and all different forms, right? But to me, a lot of it really comes down to the really the loss of a concept of a higher being, just God, call it, right?
So there we have the first one, the Bible, God. So it's all about God, not science or reality.
So what is the the underlying beliefs of most people, even if it's an unconsciously held belief, is that we evolved over billions of years from basically inanimate matter to a single-celled amoeba into the complex, organisms that we are today.
So one more typical argument, we have not lived longer than 6,000 years, and that is, of course, based on the Bible.
And that again, we live in this like infinite universe and these ever-expanding galaxies, and and we're moving in all these directions. And
I have no problem understanding that people have a problem to understand universe and how it works. It's so big, it's so much we don't know. But does that prove that the earth is flat? Of course not.
So there's an underlying lens that we as a culture unconsciously hold, and that belief set, whether it's known to us or not, really guides how we function in this world, our thoughts, our behaviors, our actions, and otherwise. So they've basically conditioned out an understanding of the spiritual, the conscious, the mystical, and we live in this pseudoscientific world of matter where everything is explained in the material, in the physical.
And there we had another flat earth favorite, calling science pseudoscience, or select parts of science that is pseudoscience. Those who proves, for instance, flat earth, or in his case, that earth is much more than 6,000 years old, and so on. Cherry picking, it's called.
Where is there room for morals, ethics, values, and principles? Once you're in the world that they created and you're in that mindset, the idea of right and wrong become subjective to the whims of society, and they become mere convention.
So a majority of the population of this world have no moral, because a majority knows that Earth is not flat. A majority knows that Earth is much older than 6,000 years. Most of us also know that space is real, but we have no moral, only the flat earth fools have it.
So now we have this materialistic, subjective world that we're living in that's become normal. So people like any of us here who count ourselves as maybe conscious individuals, we then become, like they said about your friend in the army, we're the crazy ones.
Perhaps not crazy, but fooled by flat earth gurus like Eric Debay and the other rest of the conmen on social medias as propagating flat earth.
Just because we're different, because we are so atypical, but in reality, we're the ones holding the torch for the morals, the ethics, and the values, because we still have an idea of the conscious nature of reality. We haven't just boiled it down to mere particles that sort of are interacting in some random happenstance. So that's, to me, the fulcrum point, is this idea of they've destroyed a concept of God, creator, source, and they basically brought us into this secular world where now we see what we see in society. This is where we are. That's kind of the way I'm looking at things.
Many people in this world believes in a God. Many are Christians, Jews, Muslims or other religions, but they believe in a God. But the only ones believing in the God in the right way are you and other flat earth fools.
Let's say that Aristophanes actually did his observation and saw that the shadows were different at 400 or 500 miles apart, and postulated a globe Earth. That's possible. Okay, they may have had a theoretical conceptual understanding of a globe, but at some point science had to have realized that was debunked.
It haven't been debunked by scientists. You can do that observation by yourself with the help from some friends on other locations.
At least in the mid 1800s, when the first flat earthers came out, like Parallax or Robotham, and said this doesn't hold up.
So don't believe science. Don't believe what yourself can test and verify. Believe fools like Robotham.
We're not, we have technology now. We have telescopes and we have more advanced understanding, and we're examining this, and we're finding that it doesn't hold up, right?
So where are those so-called evidence? Where have ever a flat earther used a telescope to prove that we live on a flat earth?
And people are saying, this doesn't even hold up to logical scrutiny. So whether it was a deception from the beginning or maybe a mistake, a theoretical concept that turned out not to be true, at some point there was a deception instituted and carried out. There was decisions made to institute this deception. That's the importance, because people say constantly, what does it matter? What is it? What's the fucking shape of the earth matter? That's the point, is that at some point somebody lied to you, and not just in a small way. They instituted a massive organized conspiracy to deceive you about where you live. That's really what it comes down to. So that's also what most people can't get past, because what they'll do is they'll reject the evidence that's presented to them.
It's one very big problem with that statement. There are no evidence for flat earth. It have never been. All presented have been debunked.
They'll reject when you say, look, here's a camera, you could zoom in, that boat didn't go over anything,
And still no one have showed that. It's quite easy to use, for instance, marine traffic to see how far out the ship is. Take one that are at the refracted horizon, take a photo of it and try to zoom in. You will not succeed.
Or if you present to them, on Navy ships, there's a ballistic weapon called a rail gun.
There are no railguns at naval ships. It's in laboratories. They are testing the technique, but it's big problem with it. And secondly, railguns is not ballistic. They don't shoot ballistic.
And it shoots like 100 nautical miles line of sight.
So now suddenly it's line of sight.
You see what I mean? So it shows that the globe is physically impossible.
No, it shows that you don't know what you're talking about.
Not to mention electromagnetic propagation, not to mention the long distance observations, not to mention all the, physics that show that the globe is impossible.
And can you please present us those physics that proves a flat Earth? There are none.
My point is, even when presented with all this evidence, they'll reject it because they can't get past how large the deception is. So they'll default to a mindset that says, well, so many people would have to be in on it. And how could that possibly be? You're right. How could that possibly be? It strains credibility. But guess what? Somehow it was instituted. Somehow they perpetrated this lie on us, right? And again, once you get past the book, your pre-indoctrinated bookends, you might be able to see how they do that. Start to conjecture. Say, well, if this is a spiritual realm, if we're really talking about angels and demons and shit like that, and fallen ones, energetic beings that are interacting with us in ways that we really don't understand, once you look at a spiritual world, you can start to see the deception. You can start to see if there's a force here to deceive us for whatever reason, it starts to make sense because it then goes beyond mere mortals at that point. And you can understand what we're actually dealing with here.
So, to simplify what he's saying, he believes the devil is behind the science, the teachings about a globe, how old the earth is. Everything is because of the devil.
So why do we not have a voice in popular media and popular culture? Why is this not a discussion on the mainstream platforms? Why is nobody in quote unquote science defending the globe? They just have to ignore us.
Why would scientists defend the globe? It's an established fact that we live on a globe. So why waste time on fools like those fools on the screen here?
They just have to misrepresent our position over and over and over again, but they're not addressing it. That should tell people something right there. This idea that they won't even address it, that has to show you something, because what you can't deny is there's millions and millions of us right now who have a particular understanding of this reality that's being completely ignored by the mainstream. It's being censored here online on multiple platforms through multiple means. That says almost more than anything else right there. And to anybody with a rational mind, that should tell you something.
I think everyone with a rational mind will react to the fact that you and the other flat earthers have no proofs at all for your statements.
We really don't know much beyond the mid 1800s. Once you get past X amount of generations, whether it's 3, 4, 5, 6 generations, it's very, very, very hard to know what the history actually is.
This fool lives in a country that was founded 1776. I live in a country where it's very easy to find my relatives 100 years before that, and even 100 years more I can find my relatives.
Especially when you have an understanding of the deception. Again, if we know that we have these secret societies, these occult brotherhoods that seem to be running things, these mystery schools, then we can understand that there was some degree of collusion to perpetrate a deception.
So it's the evil secret societies behind it all. Oh dear.
Now, It appears as though that deception goes very, very, very deep, and it's expansive, because what the understanding is that it appears that our history is much different and much more recent. So they tell us, oh, there was a cataclysm 12,000 years ago. Okay. Some people will associate that with the flood of Noah. And then you see gradually climbing out of that a history that goes, a recorded history that goes back about 6,000 years.
So the Bible is a history book then. We have lived for much more than 6,000 years.
Starting with the Chaldeans, the so-called Babylonians. But when you really incorporate what's the evidence for this history, it really falls short. So then you have to question, what was this cataclysm? What were these cultures all around the world really? What were these different beings, these creatures, these humanoids, whatever you want to call them? And is it possible that the timeline is much more truncated?
Will he try to shoehorn in all Earth history in 6,000 years?
That this cataclysm, this worldwide cataclysm, may be much, much, much more recent than we've been presented with. Maybe they're cyclical. Maybe they happen at some frequency. So again, it flips the concept of the history we're presented completely on its head. So why should we believe that history? Again, just like why should we believe what they told us about, in science, about the micro and the macro? Why should we believe the history?
So he agrees with what I always say. Flat earthers are science deniers.
Especially if there's no evidence to support it. They tell us, we all have it in our mind, a belief that there was a being named Christ, and he lived about 2,000 years ago.
No, not all believes that.
Well, what if there was a being that was named Christ, but it was much more recent?
What if unicorns exist and they live on Antarctica?
You know what I mean?
Yep.
What if we were told about somebody named Moses, who apparently history tells us was born in like somewhere around 1300 BC or 1400 BC. All right. 1500, somewhere around there. That's, when they put the Moses timeline together.
Now he's mixing up history and the Bible. There are no historical evidence for Moses.
Well, what if there was this person, what if this was much more recent? We don't know the timeline.
It's even worse. You don't know if he have existed.
According to the Quran, like Jesus and Moses were related, and they are like really close to each other. Like according to the Quran, and like Moses is like the uncle of Jesus and stuff like this. And I go into this kind of alternative historical research, and Anatoly Fomenko, he talks about how history has been obfuscated, and basically 1150 years been injected into our current timeline. So we are in somewhere like 800 and like 75 after Jesus, year 875 after Jesus, not 2024.
Oh dear. Do they really believe this nonsense?
There are problems with Gregorian calendar and Julian calendar. It's another way to kind of like confuse where we are. And another point that I really wanted to make is that we have noticed that there's a thing, another tactic that they use is called backdating. So what they're doing is basically with newspapers and books, they print them in early 1900s with regular printing presses, and they're backdating them to 1700s and 1800s, and claiming that these books are actually coming from that time, when in fact they were actually printed much later. And I suspect that they're doing something similar to the maps as well. Just keep that in mind.
Wow.
So, according to those fools, the timeline is faked. They have backdated the printing of books and maps. Is there no limit for those fools' stupidity? Probably not. This was all I had for you today. It was a bit longer video. Hope you liked it. I see you soon. We'll be back in a couple of days. Bye.